Would you get nervous if Prince was in the other room recording his album? Well, we're talking about a much younger Prince. Robbie Dupree was right next door, way back when. He talks to us this week about Prince on Rock History Music. When Robbie Dupree was recording his earlier recordings, we're talking about Steal Away and Hot Rod Hearts, he was actually recording right next door to Prince. Prince would come in the evening, turn off all the lights and record some of his earlier material. And when Robbie Dupree was talking about, he said, oh yeah, and Prince was next door. What? He talks to us about Prince in that recording studio, the dark one.
Yeah, what happened was he was a young dude. He was working in a small studio too. Alpha was in a house. It was a studio right inside of the house that my engineer, Gary Brandt, lived in with his wife. Very tiny room. They had very vintage and wonderful equipment, old stuff, old mics, a really great recording console. And I don't know how Prince came to work there. I know how I did because my friends in LA knew Gary and he was able to help us. You know, we would pay for some of the studio time and he would give us the rest on spec with the hope that we would get a deal and be able to pay it all back, which we did, thankfully. And Prince worked at night and he worked alone. Gary would set him up and then he would leave him and he would work all night long in there. I even have some photographs of Prince in those days in the little recording room.
Did you ever talk to him?
No, never. I don't know anybody who did. It wasn't like he was a bad guy or something. It was just like he was very insular in the way he wanted to work. All the lights were out in the studio and he had a whole vibe going, comfortable for him to work. And if he needed any help or anything, he'd ask Gary to do something. But pretty much he was the guy who did his vocals on his own, and that's the way he worked.
Going into the first album when you recorded that, what was your vibe? Were you nervous, excited, all the above?
Well, I really think, again, I don't want to be too wordy with these answers, but if you're going in depth and you want to know the reality of it, it takes a little time. I did not have a deal. I was back here in Woodstock, New York, where I was living at the time, and I had a band for a number of years. We got a deal on Mercury, but there were differences creatively and otherwise in the band. And after all this work and all this time, I decided to walk away from the deal and leave that band with the deal and just move on and try to go solo. And with that, I moved to California and I followed a group of musicians who were in a band that I originally met in Woodstock. I loved working with them and as friends, and I followed their career. When I went to California, I asked bass player Rick Chudikoff and the drummer, Peter Bonetta, they would consider producing a demo with me, and they agreed. And over the month and months of time, we created a demo, which really turned out to be 50% of the record that you now know as the first album. And so we never got a deal. It got shopped everywhere to every label, and nothing ever happened. And that was kind of it. And then I went home, and I didn't really know what else to do. So I got a job in a factory in Long Island. A friend of mine was a foreman there, and he got me a job. And I was loading trucks with big reels of carpet, and it was really, demoralizing work. And about 2 or 3 months into that job, I got a phone call from Peter Bonetta's brother, Al, who was a manager, not my manager, that just in a casual hangout with a guy from Elektra Records, he played him the cassette of, not as a pitch, but he just played him the cassette. And the guy loved it. I think Al told him, well, you guys have already passed on it. And he said, well, I'm not passing on it. Tell him to call me next week when I'm back from Europe, and I'll get him a deal here. So there was no excitement. In terms of it, we'd already done this thing and it had already been turned down. And they wanted to give me a very small album deal. So I made a different deal. The deal I made was, let's just do a singles deal. If it's a hit in 90 days, we'll do an album deal. So they took the singles deal, and I think it was $15,000 to Steal Away and a B-side. And 90 days later, it was in the top 10. And they had to call for the album, and at that point, we got much more money and much more control. I suppose the most interesting aspect of all of this was we were not an industry band. So we recorded all this music in a very small studio out in North Hollywood where the guy had spec'd the time for me, a lot of it. The only 2 clients he had was me and Prince. And Prince was working at night and we were working in the daytime. And we finished the second half of the album and turned it in, and that became the album. But we never really were on Music Row. We never really were using the ringers. It was all friends that made those records, that and Street Corner Heroes, and most of them were members of the band that I mentioned before, and that band was called Kraken. And they were an R&B band who recorded for Warner Brothers, and they made, I think, 3 records for Warner Brothers. And unfortunately, none of them really hit, and I felt like this was an opportunity for me to, and them as friends, to make it together. That's what happened. That's the story on that.
If you would not have been signed, would you today be at least doing music?
No. No, because what happens is you can have a great deal of love for it, but if you don't get up a couple of steps on the ladder, you really, I wasn't going to go play weddings and things like that. I was never about that. So I don't know what I would have wound up doing. I can't really tell you. It's almost 40 years ago. But when it happened, it saved me from what I thought was going to happen. Once they dropped me and I couldn't get a deal. There's a little bit more to that story, too. It was so weird. The man's name was George Steele, and his father had passed away in England. And he was on his way home, and he stopped off at Al Bonetta's house on the way to the airport. I don't know, they just commiserated, guy talk, my father died, all the stuff. And Al wasn't pitching with the CD. They were just playing music and hanging out. And he perked up when he heard a particular song on that 4 or 5 song demo. I can't remember how many songs it was. I think it might have been 5. And it wasn't Steal Away. It was another song. And he said that song reminded him of his father. And that's how quirky and odd and coincidental and ironic that the story is. After years and years of playing showcases and 100 gigs and 1,000 gigs, and all of that, nothing ever happened. And in this one synchronistic moment, a guy, a stranger, hears something and changes the course of my life.
More from Robbie Dupree coming up next Friday. Make sure you comment on our videos, subscribe to our channel, and share our videos. I'm John Beaudin from Rocky Street Music.